This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar series, Literacy as Opportunity. My name is Laura Almazara, and I'm on the literacy team here at Amplify. We are so excited to have you here with us today. I have a few notes to share before we get started. As you may have just heard, we're recording today's webinar, and we'll email out a recording link for you to rewatch as you'd like. And everyone with us here today will also receive a certificate of attendance via email. If you want to access closed captions, click on the closed captions button in the bottom tray. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them at the end. We also welcome comments in the chat. So to start, let's find out where everyone is joining us from today. Oh, we already had some people beat us to it. Excellent. Wow, Bahrain. We already have an international audience. How wonderful. Lots of people from throughout the US, Hungary. Excellent. Thank you all so much. And just a quick note, we have a few more webinars scheduled for this series, so if you haven't already signed up for them, please do so. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be hosting another middle school focused session, this time talking about knowledge building. And then after that, our last webinar in the series is going to be about language screening. All of our previous webinars are available for on-demand watching, so be sure to check everything out at amplify.com/literacy-is-opportunity-series. And thank you again so much for joining us. I'd like to welcome our moderator, Laura Young. She is a literacy specialist here at Amplify. And a very, very special welcome to our panelists today. We have Kristen Constantino, who is an ELA educator from Passaic Public Schools in New Jersey. We have Carrie Maraschino, the Director of Curriculum and Instruction at Green Local Schools in Ohio. And her colleague, Samantha Ward, who is a 7th grade teacher at Green Local Schools in Ohio. And last but not least, we have Angela Turlington, who is another 7th grade teacher at Sampson County Schools in North Carolina. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. As we think about our middle school students, you know that they have a variety of different and unique needs as they come to middle school. And one of the things we understand about them is that they're highly engaged in things like their emotions and their relationships and social media. But as educators, we have to think about how we engage them in our classroom. So I'd love to hear from you how you engage students in your ELA classroom, and what is evidence of engagement? How do you know it's happening?
I think for me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I think for me, it's getting them from day one of whether it's starting a new unit or a new text within that unit, getting them excited about what they're going to be reading. Because even if it's a text that I may have, when I first started planning, think, I don't know how they're going to do with this. I was truly shocked with some of these texts, how well they did with them. But I also feel like part of it was some prep work on my part, making my room look exciting. For example, like when we did the Poe and Poetry unit with the Edgar Allan Poe, I ordered a $8 crime scene investigation unit off of Amazon, and I had, the caution tape and and they come in, and I had my mom used a skeleton at Halloween. I borrowed her skeleton, and I had him laying on a little couch in my room with the blue light on his eye. And just when they come in, they're automatically excited and want to know, what we're reading, what we're doing. And like with Phineas Gage, when we did that unit with brain science, I brought an actual iron rod and had them hold it to think, oh my gosh, that went through his skull, and they did fantastic with that unit. And I really wasn't sure to begin with, but every text that I have doubted from the beginning has impressed me, once we finished, and how well they did with it. But I think part of that starts with excitement about the whether it's the room or whether it's an activity, that you just open with excitement, because as we all know, buy-in for middle school especially is very important.
That's a very good point.
Oh, and Angela, I was going to add to what you said, because I was hesitant at first, Red Scarf Girl, Are they really going to like it? It's your passion and your reaction to the text. If you're excited, they're going to be excited. And you know it works when your classroom is right next to the restroom and you hear the conversations in the hall about material that you've already talked about. So you know it sticks when they're talking about it in the hallway, which they
Right.
are.
I love that. When they're carrying it outside the classroom and still talking about it, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
One of the comments after the escape room, the public escape room, with the casket, and when my students were leaving out of my classroom, telling the other students who were about to come in my classroom, it's going to be so fun, but it might stress you out a little, which is, AKA I had to think, but it was fun.
That's fantastic. I love the concept, really, as we think about text being at the center. We've talked a lot about the text in Amplify already, but we want to encourage students to make meaning for themselves. And I love that we've kind of leveled the playing field in Amplify, and that every student can be brought into the conversation, because there really aren't right and wrong answers when we're using that text evidence and we're developing our ideas and really playing up on those real world text and real world situations. So that being said, how do you help students build knowledge and take ownership of their learning? Because some of these concepts, like Red Scarf Girl, they come to us really not knowing a lot about. And so as we go through the text, what are some techniques that you really use to let students use that text to guide them in their learning and to guide them in their responses?
Laura, I will let the classroom teachers answer that question, but something that makes me think of with a new curriculum, I feel like all teachers and administrators feel a little vulnerable because you're learning something brand new. And there are definitely topics within Amplify that were brand new to us, and some teachers feeling like, they needed to brush off some history lessons from the past. So I think all of us just being open and willing to learn something new and modeling for our students as well, as it's okay not to know, but together we're going to find out, is an important attitude when you're adopting any new curriculum. But specifically, the topics included in Amplify have been a learning experience for everyone involved, and I will put myself in that group too. I have learned a ton.
I love that response, Carrie. And when I use this in my own classroom, I found that my students wanted to build that knowledge on their own. And frequently, if they had questions and the text didn't answer, they still wanted to find that answer and look it up. And I just thought that was incredible. They were taking their own time to find out that knowledge that they thought, and oftentimes that I didn't have, because it was a new concept for me as well.
And Laura, to add on that with the part about taking ownership of their learning, I know when the students type their responses on the side in the computer, what I'll do every night or in the morning, I'll highlight some student examples and spotlight them, and they feel like they're contributing to the conversation. Like, oh, I wasn't listening, I was. And they're like, wow, I added to that. And I try and pick different students every day that some feel success and some maybe are like, wow, I really did learn something, and it builds them up that they want to keep adding to that knowledge base.
That is a great way to bring them into the conversation. Since we kind of merge these two thoughts of engagement and knowledge, and we've hit on this just a little bit, but have any of you been surprised by any particular text or unit that you were maybe hesitant about, and they ended up really resonating with your students? I know Kristen mentioned that already, so if you want to weigh in on that, Kristen.
The way in the Liberty and Equality unit, Amplify uses multimedia features. Specifically, my students really connected with Chadwick Boseman's dramatic reading. And it was such a wonderful way to start that unit off. They were able to connect that moment, that visual experience, with the text moving forward, and it really allowed them to be engaged.
And to follow up on what Kristen just said, when we did Raisin in the Sun and Amplify had, where they would read the parts, when I was first planning out that unit, I was like, oh, for one of my classes, I thought, oh, I don't know how this is going to go, but I tried it. By far, and I'm speaking of a class with a lot of some behavioral, things that we have to work with, but once I tried, by far the best class at that, and I had totally underestimated them from the beginning. They did so well. So I guess Amplify has really shown me as a teacher to just give them a chance and let them be kids. Our job is to like keep them on track, but with Amplify, it lets them have a little bit of choice, a little bit of freedom that keeps them on track. And just, I guess I felt like, wow, if I didn't have that, and my kids didn't get that opportunity to read parts and understand what it means to be dialogue versus, stage directions and different things like that. And Raisin in the Sun is one of the texts that I wasn't sure, just based on the material, if my students would be mature enough. But again, another underestimation of just how they proved me wrong, and they have proved me wrong all year when it's come to Amplify, and I'm really proud of them. And so, yes, I would say every text that has a little bit of or lesson that, like I said before, like that I have thought, oh, I don't know how they're going to do. They've blown it out of the water.
And to add to that, Angela, I think, at least I can only speak for 7th grade, the units are so diverse that by the end of the school year, you really have hit the interest level of every single student. You know what I'm saying? And I'm very surprised. I make predictions and I'm like, oh, you really did like that one versus the other one. And so I think it's just because everything's so diverse, you hit everybody.
And I like the polls that are built in Amplify. And I know I do paper pencil, but I plan from the online portion. So I'll throw a poll on the board, and it might be Post-it note that they're putting, on the back of the door or whatever, where, but I like the polls that maintains engagement too, because their opinion is important. And I think, but it's all based on the text. When the poll, I like the polls that really can, keeps that engagement going in what we're reading.
I agree with that. I love the way that they do play in on that engagement factor, but it's also so important for middle school students to see how their thinking falls in line with others and where they rank. And so I think that's just such a nice visual, whether you're using Post-it notes or, the poll application itself. It's so great for students to see that thinking and how it falls in line.
Yeah, our school community is pretty homogeneous when it comes to socioeconomic and culturally. So the thing that I'm finding amazing this year is how Amplify, the text that they've chosen and the activities really encourages my students to explore different perspectives.
Yeah, and I like that you hit on that liberty and equality unit to start with, because working with teachers across the country, there is some reluctance. That's heavy, that's dark, it's not going to be interesting to my students. And I just say, give it a chance. You'll be surprised. And 9 times out of 10, it ends up being the favorite unit out of the year. And I don't know if any of you follow the Facebook community of teachers of Amplify ELA, but even though that's the 2nd unit in the year and it's taught in fall, Frederick Douglass's birthday was February 14th. And the things they were posting in that Facebook channel about celebrating his birthday and that the students wanted to, just really spoke to me as, how engaged they were in that unit and how it resonated with them and stuck with them.
And in light of engagement, the first unit we did was perspective and narrative, which I found incredibly helpful, because I take the approach that creating a positive and inclusive learning environment where students can learn, Maslow before Bloom's, really requires me getting to know my students. And the narrative prompts, the personal narrative students were asked to write in that first marking period was extremely helpful in doing that.
That really feeds into my next question, which has to do with stamina. As students are making that transition from middle school to high school, the expectations are really ramped up. And so one of the things I really enjoyed about Amplify was how it helps students increase that stamina, increase their persistence and endurance. At the beginning of the year, in that narrative unit you talked about, and you said you have to have 100 or 130 words, and they were, what 130? And then it was just within a couple of weeks, I would notice them comparing. I have 250. How many do you have? And it just kind of automatically came, but it did take some encouragement on the teacher part. So how do you help your students increase their persistence, their endurance, to get from a small write to a essay, to get from reading a few paragraphs to reading an entire text?
I have to say, I think that Amplify has done a lot of that work for me this year. The prompts are so interesting and the students are so engaged with the content that it's the first time in my career where I've had to say, enough guys, the time's up, stop writing, stop where you are.
I agree. The Amplify, I'm going to use the word chunking, definitely chunks the text appropriately to where they don't get to a point where they're bored, or, I've not heard that. I've not heard I'm bored, I don't know what to do, because the way it chunks it and keeps them, like when we read Raisin in the Sun, it would always leave off right when they're like, no, let's read some more. And I was like, nope, that's tomorrow, and so I love the way that Amplify chunks the text and the lessons appropriately for middle school, because what I have found is it often does leave them hanging at a point where that engagement factor is just at a peak. They're just wanting to know what happens next, kind of thing. So I think Amplify does a great job of helping build stamina by chunking the text appropriately for middle school.
Is it okay that I looked at the chat too to incorporate some of those questions in there? Because we are on a 49-minute schedule, and I know somebody had posted, how do you get one lesson in with that time frame? Some lessons you can, some lessons you just can't. And I think what we started to realize is first of all, because you're looking at different excerpts of text, students don't realize by the end of a unit, they've read a whole book. You know what I'm saying? So that is mind-boggling to them when they start to realize, wow, I read all of that. And we're like, yes, you did, and you did well with it. It's just really, you have to look at each lesson and look at the activities that go with each lesson. And sometimes if those excerpts and those lessons need reinforcement, then you need to go through every single one. Then maybe that particular lesson takes 2 days. But maybe in the next turn, maybe it's the same information and you're like, wow, they really got it. Maybe that lesson you can do in 1 day. So it really takes looking at the text ahead of time and learning your students, and you really can get it done. It's just some lessons may take more than 1 day or not. But the students are wowed that they actually have read quantity of text. And then they're not afraid of challenging text either. Like for the first time for our state testing, even my co-teach class students were like, that was really easy, because we had given them challenge rigor text and we had read a lot of it, that, they weren't scared off by it.
And I will add on to that, speaking on the rigor of text. When we started exploring different programs, that was one thing that teachers at each grade level, K through 8 in our district, started to realize, that the rigor of the text, the complexity of the text was much greater than what we had been using on a consistent basis. So it's really nice knowing that the texts have specifically been chosen for the grade level at the appropriate text, the level complexity, and it takes some of that guesswork out for teachers trying to figure out if it's a just right text for that grade level or not.
So as we think about the text, some of the supports that are built in there, we understand that these are complex grade level texts. We also understand that for most of our students, that reading comprehension hasn't caught up to that listening comprehension. How do you use the audio portion of the text or read aloud portion, or incorporate that into class to help your students understand?
We use it often in our classes. Doesn't matter if it's honors, co-teach, whatever. What's nice about the audio feature is it's an actual person, maybe like in Red Scarf Girl, it's the actual author. And so the students do appreciate that. Now, sometimes we don't use it, but often we do when we're at least starting the text and getting them used to what they're actually reading about.
And Laura, back to what I said too, of just learning new content. Oftentimes that includes perhaps names of people or places that both students and teachers are unfamiliar with the pronunciation, or for our students' vocabulary, the vocabulary is definitely high level and rich. So I think that having that audio option for both students and teachers is a great support.
That's a very good point. Yes. Thinking back to Red Scarf Girl, that was very handy. There is, I'm deviating here, but there is another question. Are there whole trade books or readings just from an anthology or excerpts? And I would say it's a nice blend, but for those of you in the classroom, how would you weigh in on that?
So I feel like the text that's provided are rich excerpts, and they also connect and build upon each other. So, for example, we are in the unit for Holocaust memory and meaning, and I have students making connections back to liberty and equality. And it's incredible because they're using critical thinking skills, and they're able to do that because the way the texts connect. And I think I could answer a little bit about pacing when I'm previewing our next lesson and it seems like it's going to be a little more challenging, or the writing component is going to take a little more time for my students, or there's been a fire drill and we don't have enough time. I found it very helpful to change the levels for the students. If you can change the level, it gives sentence starters and response help, which does make it go a little quicker.
That's fantastic. I love that, combining those thoughts and having that knowledge and drawing back on it again. As we think about writing, and we're incorporating writing, we've been talking about that. Feedback is so important. And too often at this age, I think our students feel like feedback is criticism. I love some of the aspects of Amplify and the way they incorporate feedback, like just the quick over the shoulder, the focusing on specifics with the rubrics and the comments that you can give students, and allowing them to make corrections and changes to see that growth. And also the way that the peer interaction is set up so that students have specific prompts and specific things that they need to respond on other students' writing, giving that peer feedback. They're no longer able to just look at another student and say, that was great, or I wouldn't change anything. You know, they have to have specific frames in their feedback. So I'm curious, how does feedback play a role in student success, and which feedback tools do you find most effective? You know, I will say that I was always reluctant to do peer feedback just because one student may not be able to help another student, or they would be reluctant to, and again, just provide something generic. With Amplify, I thought it was a little bit more sustainable and doable, and that they got something from it, in addition to the other things I looked at. So
the peer feedback takes some training. I think a lot of students were just used to saying, yeah, that looks good, or yeah, you capitalize the first letter of a sentence. But if you invest the time in making sure you create those strategies and skills and use the prompts to show and model, you definitely get positive feedback. But I would say it happens more toward the latter half of the year, just because you have to build those supports in. But it's nice too, because now you're hearing students acting like a community of writers, and it's kind of fun to see the fruits of the effort. It just will happen later in the year.
Right, and I agree with what Samantha said. And I think providing them examples of good feedback, like this is what good feedback looks like. This is what feedback should not look like. And you know, I'm a little different as I do all paper pencil. So that goes back to the old school days of the graffiti walk, you know, like that you go around the room and you know, and we practice how to give feedback and using actual student examples from that class of what's, you know, what's great and what's what needs more work. So I think, like you said, at least in our first year, I think I'll be more prepared next year to model that in the beginning with some things that I've found success with. But the latter part of the year, they've definitely gotten much better with that.
Yeah, I agree with Angela. Doing this again next year, I'm definitely going to spend more time going over that rubric with students, making sure they see examples of what a 4 in conventions look like. This way they could have ownership over the rubric and use it for, you know, peer evaluation as well.
But also the nice thing about the rubric is it's continuum 6 through 8. So it's also kind of fun to really, it breaks it down by focus, evidence, and conventions. So they start to have an understanding, and it's repetitive enough that they start to internalize, okay, in order to get a 4, I need to do this. And they love the immediate feedback. Like they love the fact that they can click and just see your responses and what you're doing. And they get it right there, that instant gratification of what they did well and what they didn't do well with.
My students really enjoy the spotlight option. To see their work up on the smart board is really encouraging, and it helps with engagement.
I love that, Kristen. Do they like to see their name up there, or do they prefer it to be anonymous?
In the beginning, they were a little hesitant, but now they want their name.
That's great. That's showing confidence. And I would like to add, all of our panelists are first year implementers. And so I want to follow up with that. You know, you've already pointed out several things that you say, okay, we started this and it's taken this long to get into place. Do you think you're going to see a difference maybe next year as 6th graders who've had this roll into your 7th grade class, 7th graders roll into your 8th grade class? They've got a year under their belt. Do you think that will make a difference?
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think it will make a difference for our students and our teachers, just to feel more comfortable. Things that took quite a while this first year, I feel like the pacing is going to change just naturally. I think the comfort level will make a huge difference.
I see a difference this year, so it's definitely only going to improve from the beginning of the year till now. The consistency of the lessons and how they're delivered. I actually was out and I had a sub say to me, your students didn't have any questions. They knew exactly what they were doing. So next year it's going to be even better.
I love it. Which leads me into success stories. I would love to hear something from your first year implementation that was a highlight, you know, maybe just a specific student, an overall class, an expectation that you just, you know, caught you off guard, anything.
I feel like I keep talking, but I'll share a couple of things. One, Raisin in the Sun could be a very controversial text, and like I said, I was a little nervous. They did great with it. The you know, old school like readers theater is what I thought of, you know, and they're doing parts and just really did great. And so I contacted a local theater we have in town, and it's like a very old school theater. And I said, hey, if I bring the DVD and get all the permissions and things, could you play the movie? And, you know, my kids go on a little field trip. And so we actually partnered up with the local university and ate at the dining hall that day. That was the first time I would say 90% of my kids had ever seen or been on a college campus. They were blown away. Like, we can go get more drink. We don't have to sit down the whole time, you know, just kind of the exposure. And then the going to the movies and seeing the movie to the book. It was just like the highlight. And they knew everything, the ins and outs of the book, and just so like that was part of our engagement in one way. But these are kids that have never been on a field trip because of COVID, and they've never so that was just like huge highlight. Not necessarily a success story, but one thing I want to work at for next year is that may not necessarily be built into Amplify, but kind of on my and that's one thing I want to say too. I'm getting squirreled here, but don't be afraid to make it yours, because you can always you're you. And I was nervous in the beginning about how it seemed so structured, but I feel like it's been the opposite. Like yes, it's structured, but you can, it's like, you take what your kids need, because your kid's the best, and you add your little flair to it. And I'm a very artsy person, so my room is decorated for every little unit we do, and that's just me. The teacher down the hall, not so much, but she has her own little flair for things. So with going back to Raisin in the Sun, not necessarily much a success story, but I knew a field trip for these kids would be the highlight. But one thing I want to do for next year is almost some sort of similar culminating activity, whether it's going somewhere, whether it's for example, we did a brain science day on our entire hallway that totally brought in the brain science unit all together, but we did it cross-curricular one day. We called it Brain Science Day. We all had t-shirts, and so I want to plan some sort of culminating activity for each unit next year that they are able to look forward to when they finish, because they've worked hard for it. But I would say success story wise, the kids and the pride that they have had in their writing. Most of my 7th graders are anywhere that my classes anywhere from a kindergarten to a 3rd, 4th grade reading level. And what they have been able to produce. We would get done with the introduction and they were like, "Do you look at my essay?" And I was like, "Baby, that's just the first paragraph," and they were so proud of themselves. And like Laura said, it's the further along in the year, the more that they were producing. Had it not been for Amplify, I don't know that they would have produced that. Just the way it's set up, chunks at the time, and my lower kids, I could give them sentence starters. I didn't have to come up with that. Amplify has it, to guide them along the way. So I would say success story for me is the pride in a middle schooler's eyes and just their demeanor when they produce that writing and they know they're done and they've worked hard. I got chill bumps just saying it now. I could just think of one student in particular that is just like, "I can't believe I wrote that." And I'm like, "You did, So the pride, because that's hard to instill in middle schoolers this day and age on writing based on difficult, rigorous text. And I'm just so proud of them. And I think the pride that they have gotten from their writing has been the biggest success story for me.
Well, I think those are both success stories. I think just the whole theater experience, you've built community there. And I think that's a very important part of their educational experience as well. But I love that pride story for students, for middle school students, to be taking that ownership and that seeing that in their own work, recognizing it, wanting to celebrate it, like in the spotlight wall, in their writing and going forward. Anyone else have a success story?
I have a few. I'll try to keep it brief though. So like I started off with, it's really important for me to incorporate restorative justice practices into my classroom for my students and create an inclusive learning environment where they feel a sense of community and supported. And the unit materials that are available, I took those materials, which I found to be extremely helpful, and created student folders. And they have their own shelf with their materials on it, and they can pull from those tools whenever they need them. And they take pride in having a space in the classroom and having their tools, and they're using them effectively. And the second thing, for moving children into high school, my goal is to see evidence of intrinsic motivation to learn. And I've definitely seen that this year. Specifically, we had an opportunity to debate. Students in one of the activities were debating characters' motivation. I never would have thought to turn that text into that kind of experience. My students loved it so much that I can't get them to stop speaking with debate language. And they've asked me to create like a debate club because they want to continue doing it. And it's really cool.
That is a fantastic success story.
Well, then I can piggyback because mine's kind of a hybrid of both of yours. I have the one extreme where I have my lowest reader ability making a comment to another kid in the hallway who was doing something inappropriately, using the word limbic system, and don't use that as an excuse to try and get out of your adolescent brain. And I was like, using total language and understood exactly what we had talked about 3 months ago. So I was very surprised that he had retained all of that. And then on the other end, my honor students love that Perception Academy quest with the different disorders, to the point that they asked if they could recreate a different version of it with different types of disorders, and wanting a debate club because they love the insanity debate with Poe, and just loving that formal, learning the language, learning how to actually rebuttal and counter arguments, and constantly wanting to have opportunities to debate, that they want to take some of the text and make it into a debate. And I'm like, okay, so the passion is definitely there.
And you know what's so great about that is when they do that, and when they do that with Amplify, it's not just debate for debate's sake. They have the text, they have the vocabulary, they have the knowledge to be able to back up their sides. And that's what makes them want to do it, because they can come to it fully prepared. Fantastic. Carrie, as a curriculum supervisor, have you noticed in first year, I know you're just in first year, but any specific changes in the classroom environment, in the teacher prep, anything kind of overall?
Yes, I would. Our middle school team is an experienced group of teachers, dedicated to say the least. And the amount of time that teachers were spending on gathering resources and creating materials prior to having Amplify, it was above and beyond definitely the school day, and definitely what any educator should be expected to do. So now that we do have high quality resources in everyone's hands, I've seen a shift of the time that teachers are spending. Instead of figuring out who's copying what, who's grabbing and preparing which resources, teachers are able to really focus their conversations on the text, and what instructional strategies are going to be used, what support students may need, or how they're going to differentiate. And a lot of that is built into the program, as well as the others have mentioned. So for me, I feel like the huge success is just knowing that our teachers have what they need to provide high quality instruction, and then also that our students are receiving a similar experience. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, because as was previously mentioned, we all bring our special tweaks to things to make it our own. But knowing that the students will receive that common experience, common vocabulary, is very encouraging for me, knowing that they're going to go with that common experience to the next grade level. So just that consistency across grade levels, I know is going to be beneficial in the long run for us.
Thanks, Carrie. As we think about that consistency, there is kind of a routine format, a lot of flexibility. And as you said, teachers can bring their own art and craft of teaching in on this. I have noticed several questions in the chat about pacing, and some specifically about the 100 lesson pathway. In your classroom, are you doing full scope and sequence, 100 lesson pathway? Can you speak about either of those?
In our district, we are using the 100 lesson pathway this year. We selected to do that, as Samantha had mentioned. Our periods are not the recommended amount of time. And also in the first year, just knowing that things would take a little bit longer. And it did allow each grade level to read a novel that, in our case, were novels that we have read in the past, but also were recommended through Amplify. So it was a win-win. However, teachers are absolutely able to go above and beyond the 100 lesson pathway if they have the time and student interest is there. But we are currently using the 100 lesson pathway.
And Kristen, are you doing full scope and sequence or 100 lesson pathway?
You're doing full scope and sequence.
And pacing?
We have a pacing guide, and I think given that it's our first year, we're going to revise it a little bit for next year. But for the most part, I'm able to get through in a one block period the entire lesson without sending my students home with homework, which, for my students, homework is inequitable. So it's really helping them. I also just, the vocabulary app I have to talk about because I have a lot of students where English is their second language. And the way the vocabulary app illustrates contextual definitions has been so helpful for my students.
I agree with that. I think the vocab app is just an excellent way for them to really apply the words, not just matching up the term and definition. And I also love the instant feedback in the vocab app. It tells them immediately, got it right, got it wrong, and why. Anyone else want to speak about ways that you've brought vocabulary? I mean, I'll be bluntly honest, when I was in the classroom in a time crunch, vocab was one of those things that was going to fall by the wayside, unfortunately, even though I knew it was so important. With the vocab app and with the vocab modules, I felt like it was much more manageable, but those are just some tools. So how do you see vocabulary in your classroom? So reveal words, vocab app.
Well, I know for us, we struggled trying to incorporate the time of doing the vocab app. So what we brainstormed for next year is we went to the skills modules and we looked at the vocab modules that way. And we created weekly homeworks to at least have them a chance to learn what a root word was or prefix, suffix, or whatever. And then we were hoping to create these word walls and stuff the following year once they had that basis of the routines and strategies.
I love that. That's a great way to bring that in. So moving on to questioning. Questioning is essential to learning, and we want students to both ask and answer questions. We've talked a little bit about how we've kind of leveled the playing field with the text and the knowledge building, and bringing in that SEL component as well. How do you encourage and facilitate a safe space for questioning, for both asking and answering those questions? Or do you feel like that is kind of incorporated already in the lessons?
Well, I can jump on this one. There's a, I don't know where it was in the Amplify platform, but the academic discussion tutorial video, and having used that and showing that and modeling that, like I said, that first quarter is just really building the practices and routines that you're hoping that they learn. I do think it has created, they've learned how to listen and hear and speak and contribute. And then again, it's just spotlighting conversations you've heard. You're walking around the room and you're listening to them talk about the prompts and whatever. And then you're like, hey, I noticed that this particular group said blah, blah, blah. And I really appreciated hearing blah, blah, blah. And it just naturally festers. And now everybody is having those good academic discussions.
I love that you included listening in as part of that. That is a skill and students need to develop it. And I think that is very important component.
Samantha's classroom and many other ELA classrooms too have the teacher or have the students sitting in groups facing one another. And I think that that naturally just lends itself when it's time to turn and talk and have those conversations that they're already in that group. And as Samantha mentioned, really listening in and spotlighting those conversations to the whole class really encourages students to make sure that they're on task and following through what's asked for them, knowing that they're going to come to that whole group discussion then, and their group may be called upon then to share their ideas. And I want to piggyback too, I know Samantha said early on, just the building that excitement in the classroom. I think that our teachers that are able to build that excitement with students, it just naturally evolves into those richer conversations.
Good point. So now moving into supporting all learners, we've touched on this several times. There are aspects in place in the Amplify program, multiple entry points for differentiated learners, regardless of their fluency or ability level. So can you share how you've used these supports in your classroom and facilitated learning for all students? I know Angela's already spoken about maybe using some sentence frames, some different aspects. I know we have some EL populations. So how do you utilize those supports, or how do students receive those, and how do you make the best use of them in your classroom? I know I'm going to call on Kristen because I know that EL was an important component in the lesson planning and lesson pacing for students.
And I just shared something in the chat that I thought was really helpful about the vocabulary app again. I know I'm talking about it a lot, but I see growth in my students from accessing the app regularly. One of the ways I build on that growth is like we were just speaking about before the call started, that state testing is coming up. So I'm changing my students' vocabulary levels to academic vocabulary to ensure that they're exposed to all the different academic terms that are going to appear on the test.
Nice. We were talking before the call about maybe in a co-taught classroom or an inclusion classroom, how the dynamic has kind of changed because of the supports in Amplify. Samantha, would you speak to that?
Yes, my resource teacher, my inclusion teacher, absolutely loves the supports, especially like when it comes to the writing prompts. You can change the levels prior to the kids, even knowing. So when everybody's looking on their computer screen and responding to the prompt, their computer screen doesn't necessarily look different. It just provides more scaffolds in there to help them with the writing process. So we just like that freedom and flexibility, and we're always constantly changing the levels. Maybe the text is informational, so this student may need a little bit more help with this type of vocabulary. And so it's just very adaptable pretty much to what you need based on the needs of your students for that particular lesson.
And I think that you talked to how their screen may look a little bit different. It's still the same activity. It's still basically the same prompt and that kind of thing. I found it interesting how students responded to seeing the differences. Sometimes, even if it was a highly scaffolded activity, it put in more steps and they felt like they were doing more work actually, instead of necessarily being supported. But I thought those really did help the students, and oftentimes maybe even help their neighbor if they saw a sentence frame or something like that, looking on each other's work to really give them that whatever they might need to be successful. And love that you're changing it constantly, because one student may do very well on a science-based unit and maybe not so well on another one. So those placements can definitely change. And the same with Kristen, changing in the vocab app for test prep. I love that. Now, we are at the end of what I had planned to talk about, and we've hit on many of the questions in the Q&A, but I keep seeing quite a few pop in there. Laura, are there specific ones that maybe we haven't addressed that we could highlight now, or if anyone wants to put in a question?
Yeah, certainly. Please feel free to add any questions that you've had. It'll be easiest if you put them in the Q&A. It's just easier for us to keep track of. I do have a couple that I don't think have been fully answered, so I'll get started with those and we'll see where we go. So firstly, someone asked if there's room within the curriculum for teachers to teach their own texts that are near and dear to their hearts.
Well, we did hit on that a little bit with that 100 lesson pathway. And that is one of the great things, the flexibility of this program. And I think that 100 lesson pathway definitely, and Carrie and Samantha talked a little bit about this, gives you those extra days to bring in those units that, you love, your students love, you found very effective, that even may complement some of the units that you're doing in Amplify. I worked with a teacher right before Christmas who had always taught Elie Wiesel's Night in 8th grade. And I said, great, do it when you do the Holocaust unit. And so that kind of marrying those two things, that unit that you love, also, but giving you that flexibility to do that. Anyone else that's doing the 100 lesson pathway? Are you seeing the time to bring those in? Is that working well?
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Angela, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Amplify also offers like additional reading opportunities that support or complement that. Like, for example, a Raisin in the Sun unit, like one of the alternate texts that, or I can't remember the wording that Amplify uses, but it's additional reading opportunities that complement that unit. For example, one of them was Hidden Figures, and they may be familiar with that movie. So I think some of the texts that we know near and dear may be on that additional reading opportunities list. So they naturally are going to complement, and the Amplify 100-day pathway hits so many different, whether it's parts of history or whether it's just that your favorite text that you just can't let go, don't let it go. Like, if that's you, be you. Find where it best fits and do it. Like, don't change. Don't feel like just because it's a new curriculum, you have to change everything you've ever done. Like, that's what I thought. And I cried and I cried and I cried. And I was like, I'm not going to like this. I'm getting out of education. Oh, it was a big ordeal for me because I'm very like, I want to be good at what I do. And like, I want to, and I lacked the confidence. And once I said, okay, you know what, I'm going to try it and I'm going to give it 100%. And I absolutely love it. And here we are. But so those things that were always near and dear to my heart, I didn't let them go. And what I found is a couple of the texts that I actually really love were on the additional reading opportunity list. So sometimes it just kind of works out like it's supposed to anyway, but definitely be you, and don't be afraid to do that. But also Amplify is going to surprise you in a good way. And so give it a chance too.
That's great.
And go ahead. Sorry. And to piggyback off of that, we jokingly use Amplify also as a verb, because some of the stuff that was near and dear to our hearts when we got there, we're like, oh, maybe we should try this strategy with it because of how the students responded prior to doing it, that we almost amplified it, if that makes sense. Like some of the technical stuff, we've kind of made it into a verb. So you might be surprised that what you thought was really, really, really cool and you loved, you still love, but you realize, oh, I want to tweak it because the student response with some of the other activities prior through Amplify, you're like, oh, I could totally do this with it. So
I love that. I have not heard that before, but I'm going to steal that from you. We've amplified it.
Yes, we made it a verb.
Somebody just weighed in on the chat and said, this year, the 100-day pathway is taking us 200 days. I'm going to say, give yourself some grace. There is a learning curve to all of the aspects of this program. And, you know, it is a learning curve, but it is definitely worth it. And I think that it will come. Does anyone else want to weigh in on, have you seen a change in the pacing as you've gone throughout the year?
I feel like our teachers have noticed, and it might be a unit or two after when they're reflecting back and thinking of the first unit or the second unit, now realizing how they'll be able to do things maybe a little bit differently, a little quicker. And I do think that things initially that may perhaps not make sense, and our natural instinct is, you know, how can we change this? This doesn't make sense. It might not be until a week or a month or a unit away that you realize, oh, that's why they had us do that in the first unit. So I feel like just giving the program a true try and allowing those pieces to fall into place definitely does make a difference.
That's wonderful. Thank you all for sharing that. I think we have time for one more question here. Someone asked if there are whole trade book texts or if the readings are from anthologies or excerpts. I was wondering if you could speak to your experience with that.
I think I'm just speaking from my classroom experience with it. I taught 7th grade as well. And, you know, there is the entire text of A Raisin in the Sun. You do end up reading most of A Red Scarf Girl. You know, as far as like entire novels, you're also reading the bulk of Phineas Gage, A Gruesome But True Story. And you could, you know, even if it's, I think, but maybe we're reading 80% in class and the other 20% is in the solo or the homework, you know, they end up reading the entire text if you choose to do that. But as Kristen said earlier, even the excerpts are perfect and rich and thorough. So it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel piecemealed, I guess would be the right word. It does feel like that you're reading cohesive, full text.
It does feel like that. And as far as exploring different perspectives, it allows you to do that because you're not taking the entire marking period on one text. So for example, not only did we read The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, and the excerpts that were chosen were sufficient enough to have students make deep connections with the text. But we also were able to read an excerpt from The Life of a Confederate Girl. And I feel like pairing those texts creates the students like have an opportunity to compare and contrast and then critically think based off of what they've read.
Really rounds out the learning, I think.
Wonderful. We have just a few minutes left, so I just want to throw it back to the panelists. Make sure you all were able to share everything you hoped to today. If you have any other words of wisdom or anything to share about your experiences, we'd love to hear it.
I would say just with anything new, providing yourself with grace as you move through the first time, and knowing that, you know, everyone's working really hard. You need to just try your hardest, do your best, and know that each day things do become a little easier. And I think that our teachers did an amazing job this first year, but I am looking forward to the second year, just as everyone, both students and teachers, feel a little more comfortable, see how things go.
Thank you,
And,
Carrie.
and I would say to give it 100%, like, you know, really, it may not be of the same flow that you're used to, or it was very different for me. It's very different from what our district had ever implemented before. And I guess that's what I was initially kind of pushed back with. But I mean, truly, I regret feeling that way now. So I would just say, give it a chance if this is a new curriculum to you this upcoming year, or, you know, just take it piece by piece. And if you give yourself grace, like she said, and if you don't finish the 100-day lesson pathway in 100 days, guess what? Nobody finishes it in 100 days. Like, everybody has, you know, fire drills, and everybody has things that happen that aren't built in this pretty 100 lesson pathway. It's at the end of the day, it's okay. It's okay. And I would say too, if it's, you know, our motivation and our excitement is contagious. So especially in your first year, put forth that extra pre-planning on the forefront. Just kind of know that you may have to do that. And if it doesn't work out as you planned, it's okay. But it is very different, or was for me, than anything our district had ever implemented before. But I truly feel like it's there and everything's set up for the benefit of the students.
Wonderful.
I just saw one more question come in, and with 30 seconds left, I would love, they asked, are you satisfied with the writing components and requirements? Yeah, I think I don't know if you were in on the beginning, we've talked quite a bit about how students have really risen to the challenge. They're excited to write, but they're producing so much more, I think, in that given time, and really bringing in all the elements that they need to. And I think it's just that practice and that follow through and that feedback really does lend itself to helping the students be successful writers.
And thank you all so much. A big thanks to our panel here. We had Laura, Kristen, Carrie, Samantha, and Angela. And thank you all attendees for joining us today. I know it's toward the end of the year, so time is definitely at a premium. This has been a wonderful discussion and very informative. Just want to do one last reminder. We have a couple more webinars in this series. So for all you middle school educators, please be sure to join us on Monday, May 15th, where we'll be discussing knowledge building in middle school. And then our very last webinar in the series is about language screening, but we have lots more that we've recorded and is available on demand. You can find the list and register to watch the recordings or for those upcoming webinars at amplify.com/literacy-is-opportunity series. Excuse me. Thank you all so much for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your day.